So I want to talk about Mariah May in AEW. So unfortunately, she's been removed from the roster page and she's off the roster. And that could be two things. Like honestly, you never know. She can make a surprise return at All In. And, that could be something, in the Mercedes Moné and Tony Storm match. There could also be a situation where they're talking about making a women's tag team division, and she could be in that. And then also another thing that could happen as well is that you could have a casino gauntlet match. They did that for the men last year, so maybe they do that for the women, and then Mariah comes back there. So there is a chance that it can be a swerve because there's an old saying from Eric Bischoff, which is controversy creates cash. And now you have people talking. Now you do something with it. You can have people come back, and there's also another theory, and there's gonna be a lot of criticisms of AEW in this video, but there's also another theory that just like with Stephanie Vaquer, who did Forbidden Door with Mercedes Moné, and then she did a Benedict Arnold. She decided to join a WWE because that was her goal. Maybe I've heard stories about Mariah May wanting to go to WWE. So ultimately, I have no problem with any wrestler who wants to go to the company that they want to work for. For example, look at Kurt Angle. Like he went to TNA because that was better for his body. You look at Sting, who stayed in WCW for a long time. You look at Tommy Dreamer, who was loyal to ECW. You have wrestlers like MJF who are loyal to AEW. So, and then some people transfer over, like Jade Cargill, who wants to go to WWE. So I have no problem with wrestlers who want to go to where they want to go to. It's your life. You want to go to where you want to go to. But there's also, something to be said about AEW that it has a really great women's division, but it has, definitely some really, really, really bullshit booking. Like Kenny Omega, who was in charge of the women's division, I believe he needs to be fired from that job. And they need to hire more writers for the women's division. And I've even said this, talk to everyone on the roster, be like, hey, let's talk about your life a little bit. Maybe we can make some stories that are based on your life. You dealt with bullying or overcoming, or when you look at your wrestlers, you have to think about, what type of wrestler they can be. You have Abaddon, who could have been, who's not there. Now you have the Toxic Spider, who kind of could have been your goth girl type of one. You have Julia Hart, who could be your goth girl type. You have Billy Starks, who could be like your Jeff Hardy, that underdog going through all the opponents type. You have Queen Aminata, who wants to, represent black people like Swerve does, and then you also have, Ember Moon, who, who's been a champion for like gonna be close to 1,000 days. She can go and be that person that's like, I've been 1,000 day champion. I'm going to retire that title. I'm going to kick ass on the main roster. You have Harley Cameron and Anna Jay, who have a great chemistry, and you can explore that more. You have Penelope Ford and Megan Bain, who have a great chemistry. You can explore that more. You have Nyla Rose, who's this big, bad powerhouse type of women. You have Tony Storm, who's Miss Sunset Boulevard. You have Mercedes Moné. There's so many different characters, but like I said, the problem is you have no direction. And I've actually had a conversation with Ricky Starks by email, and he agrees with my assessment that Tony Khan is afraid of giving power to people. So the problem is that more than likely what happens is that he's overbooking and he's overworking himself. So he puts things on the wayside. I've told people about how I edit my travel videos and my AEW reviews. Sometimes I don't touch some things for weeks or months because I'm busy with work and everything like that. I just made a video to Phoenix, and it's one of the best videos I've ever done because I said, no, I just got back from Phoenix. I'm editing this fucking video. Fuck the overtime. Fuck everything. And if I can't do that, then I have to call, some of my friends like Paul and have them help me out. And Tony has to do that. He can't do everything. And then the other thing, too, is that he just doesn't know how to micromanage because if the women's division AEW, like I said, it's been criticized heavily for the booking. It's been criticized heavily for everybody being afloat, really, so it needs a major, major revamp. So, and I think Mariah May needs to kind of it really needs to be a lesson to Tony, just like with Ricky Starks and Jade Cargill and Cody Rhodes. that there are many, many talents in AEW that are just not going to tolerate it anymore. You have to use people, you have to book people better, you have to find writers and bookers to help you out, really, and you have to say, okay, I'm going to give you 3 months, I'm going to give you 6 months, I'm going to give you 9 months, I'm going to give you a year. If things are not going forward, there's the fucking door. I'm going to find somebody else, really. And that's what a good boss does, because as I said, like the reason why the most off-putting thing about Tony Khan is that he doesn't care about consequences. He does not care about, okay, you're going to lose Mariah May. That's a really big deal. So I've kind of said it very clearly that the issue with AEW is that um, they have really bad booking and why they have bad booking. And then I will say, like, in how it fits with Mariah May is that, there's really nothing more that she can do, because you can't do Tony Storm versus Mariah May. Otherwise, it's going to come off like Randy Orton versus John Cena, and then also comes off like Will Ospreay versus the Don Callis family, because usually Tony Storm wins a lot. So you don't want it to be like the Don Callis family, who are, like, as I call them, the Will Ospreay jobbers. So you can't always have that dynamic going. The other issue is you can't do Athena versus Mariah May, because why would Mariah May want to be the ROH Women's Champion? Because that's just on a show that really doesn't matter. They've not done a lot with ROH, really, unless you make it a developmental, like an NXT type, and they need to do that. But why would Mariah May want to be? It would be just like giving her the ECW title when it was in WWE, where it didn't mean anything. So she can't do that. And then also with the TBS title, you're doing Mercedes versus Tony Storm, which they should be doing, but then it's almost like, what would happen if that I really think it should go Mercedes either gains both titles or loses, and then she needs to face Willow Nightingale, and then after she faces Willow Nightingale, she needs to kind of get time off, really, and then you can do Willow Nightingale versus Mariah May. That's the best way to reintroduce Mariah May, in my opinion. And then I've also talked about what I think I need to do another video about is that there's a lot of benefit in doing a women's tag team division, but as we've kind of seen, the issue with AEW is that they don't have good booking, but there's so much good booking that they can do. But then it's almost like you put Mariah May in the women's tag team division. She and Nyla Rose could be great because they're both vicious and violent. She and the Toxic Spider can be good because they both have like this very vicious style, to them. There's so many things that that they can do well with Mariah May. But I also understand, and I think this is very true. Same with Jade Cargill, which is, if you're in a professional wrestling company, you do not want to, if you're doing really great, you don't want to settle for a downgrade. So, like I've said, you look at somebody like Jade Cargill. She was undefeated. Why would she want to wrestle for AEW if she's kind of like in a background character? They don't really have a good momentum for her. Why would you want somebody like Rusev, who's had some good matches and he's had a lot of charisma? Why would you want him to kind of float around? Or why would you want somebody? I think a great example is like Brian Cage. He did a really great job in TNA wrestling. He's had a really great beefy look, and you see how he's been very poorly booked in AEW. He kind of like, he loses way too much, really. Like, I can even have a match with him in AEW, and more likely I have a better chance of kicking his ass because they always book Brian Cage to lose too much. So you don't want to kind of be that wrestler that goes from like shine to shit, really. So she doesn't really fit into AEW just because of the bad booking, and then just also the pattern of how they book things. She's better off in WWE. And I would also even talk about, as I've said before, just to reiterate, she shouldn't be in Ring of Honor because Ring of Honor doesn't matter. She shouldn't be in the women's tag team division because, if they do that, then how is she going to... is she going to be booked well when already they don't do good booking with their title divisions? And then also the other thing, too, is that you can't do Toni Storm versus Mariah May forever. And... also, the TBS division, it's all about Mercedes. And then, like, if Mercedes has all this power and all this pull, really, she's going to become just like the Fabulous Moolah with her title reign. She can be holding that title for a couple of years. It's not going to help anybody. So, I think they need a serious revamping with their titles. And that's going to hold other wrestlers on the roster to if they revamp their titles, they revamp their booking with the titles, and they kind of say each division has to accomplish this thing and that thing, really, then I think it would be a good opportunity for Mariah May to actually be with the company. I think that, like I've said, tag team division should be taking some wrestlers who maybe not ready for the women's championship, and then kind of building them a little bit better. The TBS champion is just really, well, preparing somebody for the women's championship, and the women's championship should be, hey, you know what, you could be a draw on pay-per-views. So like, Will Nightingale's ready for the AEW women's championship. Harley Cameron is ready for like the TBS championship or the tag team championship, and then you have like Anna Jay and Harley Cameron who've come and floated around the roster. They're ready for the tag team championship. So there's a lot of things that they can do. But I also want to talk about WWE a little bit. There's ups and downs for WWE. They're overpopulated in WWE, and they're trying to rip off AEW by over-signing people. So there will be a day where they fire a lot of people. So you can even have a situation where Ricky Starks gets fired because I think with Ricky Starks, from he got injured, so he can not be there. Ethan Page, he's not been relevant for a while. And then also too, you look at I think like Brian Pillman Jr., another wrestler too that I think has a lot of potential, wasn't utilized very well, so he could be like kicked off of WWE. Then that could happen to Mariah May. She could be. It could be a situation where she's there for a while, then maybe she's like flavor of the month, and then she goes away really. So WWE is not the be all end all. And the other thing that I would say about Mariah May is that I think New Japan Pro Wrestling is struggling. So like maybe she can go to New Japan for a couple of months and she can be like this the star in New Japan Pro Wrestling. That could be something. And I also will say that another thing about WWE is that the benefits for Mariah May are a lot. That there's so many people that she can feud with, work with. WrestleMania is like where every wrestler wants to be. And then also with her, she's more of an edgy type of wrestler because she gets violent and gritty. And I think with WWE, there's such a market for that, really. And then also, too, she likes to travel. She's from the UK, if I'm correct. So she can do British wrestling because there's NXT UK. That she can be on NXT. She can be on SmackDown. She could be in on Raw. She can like go to Mexico for a while because they're trying to expand into Mexico a little bit more. There's so many things that can there's so many things that she can do, really. But I think she's never gonna run out of opponents in WWE. But the other thing with her is that and WWE has been doing this a lot with AEW wrestlers, is that they try to like give them the honeymoon treatment and all that stuff, because they're trying to be a billboard to say, hey, WWE is better because we book people better. So yeah, I think that WWE is the best option for her, because I think with AEW, they've not gotten out of that funk of poorly booking the women's division, and there's so much that they can do, but they just book the women's division so poorly. And I've said this many times. You look at the roster. You have Abaddon, who could be the goth girl. Now you have the Toxic Spider, who could be the goth girl. Britt Baker is an AEW original. You had Saraya, who was a WWE veteran. Queen Aminata could be this representing black wrestlers type of woman. Then you can have Nyla Rose being the powerhouse and being a controversial wrestler because she's trans and fight for trans rights. And also just like, hey, if there's places like Oklahoma where she can't wrestle, have her have matches, have her get arrested. And then you have, Mariah May be like this very vicious, brutal type of wrestler. You have Billy Starks be this underdog. You have Athena be this wrestler that's like, hey, you know what? I want to go from the developmental to the main roster. I have something to prove. I've been a 1,000-day champion. You have, Marina Shafir, who's done a horrible job with the Death Rider. She and Will Nightingale should be having a match, should be having street fights. They should just be raising each other's brutality level. But they're not doing that. And you have Taya Valkyrie, who's an excellent wrestler, and John Morrison. They could be an intergender team, but also too, like John Morrison, how fucking sad is that, really? His wife should be on top of the women's division, and she should be wrestling on the main roster. And then you give John Morrison be like her manager, and they can be each other's manager and stuff like that. John Morrison, a guy who's a TNA champion, a guy who can still wrestle, do great stuff. He's just he's fucking around on Ring of Honor, really. Like I've said, you listed all these people, and I can go on and on about that. But these are just these people that I think of, and there's so much potential, but it's just really poor booking. So as I said, Tony needs to learn from the failure of Mariah May, and the failure being the booking of Mariah May. The only box she fits in so well, she can't fit into other boxes. So the other stories that you can tell with her, there are other stories that you can tell, but it comes down to very piss poor booking. It comes down to possibly Tony Khan, not being on Kenny Omega's ass, who's in charge of the women's division, and him not also, and maybe Tony Khan himself being like, hey, you know what, we need to book our women better, really. There's other stories, there's other feuds that they can be doing. You know what, we need to hire more writers. We need to kind of say, in 6 months you need to turn this around, or at AEW All In, we're going to have 3 women's matches, and please tell me how we're going to make all the women's matches compelling and matter. We have Toni Storm versus Mariah May. We can do a women's tag team tournament, and then have it be Harley Cameron and Anna Jay versus, a tag team of, 2 formidable women, maybe like Nyla Rose and somebody else. And then you should do Willow and Marina Shafir. Or even if you did like a women's tag team division, you could do an over the rope type of match, like a Royal Rumble type of thing between tag teams, and then crown new tag team champions, just to show what the women's rosters can do and all that, But ultimately, this should be a reminder to everybody that the women's division AEW, it needs a hard reset, and it's inexcusable, And if people don't want to watch AEW because of Mariah May leaving, it's a good fire on Tony Khan's ass hairs for him to do better. And then the other part of it is, like I've said, I think the issue with Tony Khan, the biggest weaknesses that he have is that he's not a man of consequences. He lost. If he loses Mariah May, just like taking a big hit in the stock market, you learn from your failures, and it represents the failures of the women's of the bad booking the women's division. I wish Mariah May well. She comes back to AEW, awesome. But ultimately, you know what? It's her career, it's her life, it's her investment. And if AEW is a one-trick pony, it's just going to be her and Toni Storm, and she's going to become like Kyle Fletcher, where she's going to consistently lose to the Will Ospreay / Toni Storm. That's just not... It's a one-trick pony, really, So that's all I got to say, really. So I wish her the best. She has to do what's best for her. If WWE is a better option, then she has to do it. If she wants to go to Japan for a while, that's a better option. If she wants to re-sign with AEW and do a surprise appearance and all that good stuff, she should, And then also the other thing too is that you never know. Forbidden Door's coming up, and I think Mariah May's from the UK, if I'm correct. So obviously you can do Mariah May versus Jamie Hayter, Mariah May versus Toni Storm, because they're in the UK. That is there's the UK market for that. You want Forbidden Door to have a lot of UK wrestlers, the hometown heroes. So there's something there, So hopefully they figure this all out, really, And like I said, that with AEW All In, that show has so much eyes on it right now, really. It's definitely the WrestleMania of AEW. They really have to make it the show that says we're pivoting. And part of the pivot is to make sure Hangman Adam Page is a great champion and the Death Rider thing. You're going to bring back Darby Allin. I think he should be winning the Casino Gauntlet Battle Royale if you want. And then also importantly, reset the women's division. Like I said, you should have 3 matches on that card. It should be maybe like an over-the-rope tag team tournament for the AEW Women Tag Team titles. Show all the women on the roster, show what they can do. And then you also should have Willow Nightingale versus Marina Shafir in a street fight, and Toni Storm versus Mercedes Moné, and then so that way you show what the women can do, your roster can do, and the characters, and then building up to that tag team gauntlet match, and introduce the women, reintroduce the women, and you have something there. Then you have Marina Shafir and Willow Nightingale do a street fight, something crazy, because they really have deserved that, and that'll be a great moment for both of them to kind of bring out the best in each other. And then you have
Tony Storm versus Mercedes Moné. You do all these three things will highlight the women's division, and maybe Mariah maybe like, hey, I'll come back to this thing because they're working to figure things out, and they don't have things figured out for the women's division. So it's unfortunate, but she has to go to what's best for her career, really.